Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Book Business, What Everyone Needs to Know, by Mike Shatzkin and Robert Paris Rieger. Narrated by Tait. Forward. Book production, or publishing, is not the mysterious rite which many people seem to think it is. Almost everyone knows a publisher, or someone in a publishing office, or an author's friend. Yet it is surprising how little people know about the publishing business, and how many odd things they imagine. Stanley M. Reinhart, President of the AAP and Farrar and Reinhart. New York Times, 1936. Why should you listen to this book? The Book Business, What Everyone Needs to Know, is an insider's guide to trade book publishing in the United States. The book that can help you if you are thinking of writing a book, looking for a career in publishing, thinking of investing in the publishing business, or if you're just an avid listener who wants to know how books travel from a writer's mind to a reader's hands. This production cycle from manuscript to publication has always been mysterious to those outside the industry. It appears as a veritable black box. The making of a book seems to take longer and to require the talents of more diverse people than anyone outside the process can imagine. Perhaps surprisingly, it is also often the case that people in large publishing houses, and also some important players who operate outside the publishing house, only really understand their specific role, or their department's role, in the publishing process. This book is focused on trade or consumer book publishing, largely books that sell through brick-and-mortar stores and through the online digital booksellers. Bookstores, libraries, and the wholesalers that serve them are the book trade. We explore various sub-areas of trade publishing in the United States, each of which has its own history and expectations: hardcover, mass-market paperback, trade paperback, children's, audio, and digital. We remember a telling story from the early 90s of the #1 literary agent, a man who had built his business on the front end of the deal, enticing publishers with great new authors and works, who was a master of the art of the auction, the preempt, and all of the behind-the-scenes intel that a literary macher could manipulate to maximize the advance. Listener, if you do not know exactly what an advance is yet, we will get there. Despite his expert knowledge of the agent-author-publisher relationship, he found himself one day needing to know more about the publisher one of his clients had just signed with. To get the most from the deal and to ensure this author's future at the publishing house, the agent had to learn about the publisher up close. To do so, he hired a publishing consulting firm. As the listener may have guessed, a firm at which one of the authors was the principal consultant, to walk him through some of the more arcane workings of book publishing. What qualified as arcane to this prominent agent with years of publishing experience? The ordinary goings-on within the publishing house. This may be surprising, but it's not unusual. The players in and around trade book publishing can be very narrow in their knowledge about the industry and still be very good at their jobs. It's no wonder that to those outside the industry, the picture is even blurrier. And with the rate of change in publishing accelerating, it is more of a mystery even to the biggest bibliophiles among us. The authors of this book have between them well over 8 decades of experience in the book business. Robert has been on the senior staff of several of the industry's largest companies. The consulting experiences of both Robert and Mike touch virtually every important player in the English-language publishing world over the past half-century, and they have had significant exposure to many of the non-English players as well. They come to writing this book with thorough knowledge of how it is done by the pros. Despite this, both Robert and Mike are unconventional thinkers and have challenged many of the industry's standard practices throughout their careers. In this book, their primary job is to describe how publishing works and why. Over the course of the book, they also challenge many of the most conventional practices in the business. This book was written during a long era of great change in book publishing. As the cliché goes, the Internet changed everything. And more than 2 decades after it arrived, it hasn't finished changing things yet. The movement of sales from brick-and-mortar stores to online retailers, which overwhelmingly means Amazon, and the new reality that consumers find out about books largely through online channels, have required publishers to adjust all their thinking about how they put books into the marketplace. The development of digital delivery of books, e-books, has also changed things, but the biggest impacts have been on how printed books find their readers. Publishers before never had a single customer who accounted for half or more of their sales, a position that Amazon now holds for many. The size of a publisher's sales force has become less important. The digital marketing capabilities of a publisher are not as obvious as a big sales force, but they've become increasingly critical. Publishers used to routinely ignore publicity breaks on older books because, without copies in the stores, sales wouldn't result from amplifying those breaks. That's no longer true. Rest assured that if some of these terms are new to you, they will be explained over the course of the book. Defining the main terms and concepts is a major part of the book's purpose. Not only is book publishing living in a different world from the one it was in 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, it is not clear to anybody exactly what the publishing ecosystem will look like 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Online sales today represent more than half of all sales for most publishers, and they're still growing. How far will that go? As of this writing, Barnes & Noble is closing stores, Amazon is opening them, and independent stores are enjoying a renaissance. But nobody is predicting with any certainty how long those trends will continue, or whether they will accelerate. Self-publishing is no longer growing explosively, but the potential remains for a United Artists attempt, whereby branded authors might band together to create their own publishing house. Amazon Publishing pulled back from going after broad-based bestsellers in favor of working in genres, but as their share and new brick-and-mortar presence grow, might they try again to go after big books? Publishing has always been a bit mysterious because it is so complicated. Mike has long said that publishing any book presents the opportunity to make an infinite number of decisions, which, for the sake of commercial viability and sanity, must be resisted. Big publishers standardize as much as they can, but still, as the listener of this book will hear, there are many steps, from a title's being acquired, usually before it is completely written, to its delivery to its ultimate reader. Mike and Robert spell all that out and demystify the publishing process. But they won't make it simple, because publishing isn't simple. And they won't make clear what will happen in the years to come, because, near as they can tell, nobody knows. But they will point you in the right direction. A note from Mike Shatzkin. A sad note that is important to readers. About 3 weeks after Robert and I turned in the final version of our manuscript, he passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. This meant that I had to finish the job, including responding to the reader reviews provided by our publisher. There is no substitute for Robert's insight and imagination. Even though we had friends who could help me with segments of the business he knew a lot better than I, audio and kids' books being most prominent among them. As a personal matter, it is just so terribly sad that my gifted and warm-hearted friend couldn't share in the really fun part of being an author, talking about your book to promote it, and seeing the observations of smart people who read it and take the time to comment on it. 1. The global book business. What are the various segments within the book business, and how do they differ? The book business referred to in the title of this book is largely the trade book business in the United States. It seemed worth putting this segment of the overall global book publishing market in context. Accurately sizing the existing global market for books and attributing reasonable numbers for each component of the industry by country is as hard as solving a Rubik's Cube when one or more squares are missing. What are the key segments of the global book publishing industry? Trade, religious, higher education, L-High or elementary and high school, and professional/technical. What is trade book publishing? The most visible segment of publishing, the one most people think of when they think of book publishing, is trade publishing. It gets its name because its primary avenue of distribution is the book trade, defined as bookstores and libraries and the wholesalers that serve them. It is the most visible and influential segment of the book business, but not the largest by volume. Over the past 2 decades, online retail has gone from almost non-existent to a very substantial subcategory of its own. It has other players and components, but it basically consists of Amazon. What are the components of trade publishing? Trade is hardly a unified business. It is seen by its practitioners as comprising a number of segments, some tightly integrated, that are identified by a book's format: hardcover, fiction, nonfiction, and reference; trade paperback, mass market paperback; ebook or digital publishing; audiobook publishing, digital download and CDs; children's publishing; picture book, paperback, chapter book, and novelty. Is mass market publishing still distinct from trade publishing? Mass market publishing is now pretty much integrated with trade publishing functionally, but it has distinct roots from the days when it operated in a channel walled off from trade books. Trade publishing placed its books in bookstores by negotiated distribution that required each store to individually order each copy of every title, the theory being that the booksellers knew their audience best and were the ultimate arbiter of what books were chosen to line the store's shelves. Putting that power in the bookseller's hands actually generated a substantial expense of doing business, because it created the need for negotiations at the outset and for a buyer to make decisions for every order and reorder. After World War II, a new breed of publisher put standardized, rack-sized paperback books, often called pocket books as a generic term, borrowing the brand name of the first U.S. company in the business, in front of consumers through the wholesalers that placed magazines on newsstands and in certain mass merchandise outlets. For about 2 decades, those publishers were distinct, but as their distribution moved into bookstores and the magazine wholesaler distribution choked on the title volume it was being asked to handle, producing large returns, mass market paperbacks integrated into the trade business. A number of factors drove the integration of mass market into trade publishing. The high value of mass market rights was reflected in the advances paid to hardcover publishers for mass market rights. But then the hardcover publishers got only half of the royalties, dividing these with the author, rather than a full profit. Over time, the biggest mass market outlets, like drugstore chains, started buying directly from the publishers, rather than through the mass market wholesalers. This weakened the unique mass segment, the independent distributors, known in the business as ID wholesalers, who were the wholesalers of magazines and paperbacks that comprised the original mass market distribution system, and created a sales profile that trade publishers could handle. Over time, the mass and trade houses combined, and the biggest books got hard-soft deals instead of auctioned paperback rights. Today, all the companies that publish for the mass market channel also publish trade books, and most of the mass market books sold today are sold through trade channels. Because trade publishing is so broad in what it includes, any conceivable topic, audiences, across all ages and levels of seriousness, and formats, hardcovers, paperbacks, ebooks, audiobooks. There are subsets of trade that become specialties for some publishers. There are publishers that do only genre fiction, and others that do only books for juvenile readers. That specialization creates differentiation in the capabilities and practices of the publishers. How do the sales and distribution strategies of college and elementary and high school publishing differ from consumer or trade publishers? College textbook publishers and LHI, or elementary and high school textbook publishers, depend on professors and teachers and school systems to decide to purchase and use their books. Their sales operations are quite different from those of trade publishers, and the books often reach their customers without passing through any trade accounts. The trade is virtually irrelevant to them. They have to do their marketing to very specific and targeted audiences, and the sales function is almost always working with institutions that purchase for groups of individual users, totally unlike what consumer publishers do. How do academic and university presses operate within the trade environment? Academic and professional publishers use bookstores as secondary channels of distribution. They primarily talk to their audiences more directly. Professional publishing, sometimes called STEM for scientific, technical, educational, and medical, but which also includes books aimed at lawyers and accountants, moves a lot of its books by direct marketing to its audience and through conventions and conferences where their audiences gather and can be easily targeted. University press publishers, a subset of academic publishers with close ties to specific universities, straddle trade and professional practices, with some presses being more dependent on a highly academic audience not reached through bookstores, and others publishing many books that are primarily sold through bookstores. The biggest university press publishers, and Oxford University Press, the publisher of this book, is by far the largest in the world, are complex organizations publishing in a range of formats, sometimes including subscription journals, not just books. They are generally more rigorous about the content of their books than commercial trade houses, putting most of their books, including this one, through a process called peer review, by which the book's content is examined and vetted by qualified experts in the topic the book covers. Publishing through a university press conveys a level of review and scrutiny that is not part of the brand promise of a commercial trade publisher. What is religious publishing? The books produced by religious book publishers are, like trade books, aimed at everyday people as end users. But in the case of religious titles, their audience is devout readers in a variety of faiths. The largest subsegment is Bible publishing, which has an intricate set of rules on which editions are made for which group of buyers. We were once submitted an illustrated Bible by a book packager, and its depiction of Christ on the cross with stigmata rather than ropes meant that its market was limited, even if a stigmata errata sheet were added. It is a market not to be entered lightly, without a deep understanding of the strong beliefs of its readers. As a result, religious publishing is highly insular, with little staff crossover and with a number of the key companies located in Nashville, Tennessee. These publishers also gather in their own conventions, sponsored by the Christian Booksellers Association, now known as the Association for Christian Retail, as their members also offer for sale Christian music, Christian merchandise, from crosses to elaborate garments worn while celebrating services, and Christian franchise opportunities. Why is this book focused primarily on trade publishing? We focus on trade publishing because it is the branch of the industry that touches the most people and garners the most public attention. It is where the best sellers come from. Sometimes referred to as consumer book publishing, it is almost always the part of publishing people are talking about when publishing is discussed generally. If you are a passionate reader in your free time, the books you are reading are likely trade books, so this is the segment of publishing you will want to learn about. Likewise, if you have picked up this book because publishing as a career path calls to you, then likely it is visions of trade publishing specifically that fill your mind. Last, we believe trade publishing is inherently more complex than the other lines of book publishing, and therefore requires a clear explanation. How is trade publishing organized? In 1985, there were 12 key trade companies for whom we were able to get estimates of earnings. When we applied 2015 ownership to these 12 companies, the number shrank down to 6 companies that now controlled the volume encompassed by the 12 in our estimate in 1985. The top 3 companies in 1985 covered 48% of the trade business back then. If you apply the ownership matrix from 2015, the top 3 companies jump from covering 48% to 85% of the trade business today. This represents the much talked about trend of consolidation in publishing. Now, what had been the Big 6 is the Big 5 instead. In order of size, as of this writing, These are Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Hachette Book Group, and Macmillan. Within companies such as those in the Big Five are numerous imprints. What is an imprint? Imprints are essentially mini brands with their own specialties, focuses, identities, and often staffs. These are sometimes defined by genre. Some of these began as standalone publishing companies, so the proliferation of imprints connects to the larger trend toward consolidation. From the perspective of publishers' trading partners downstream, bookstores, libraries, and wholesalers, imprints have real identity. They are known by the books they publish and the ways they publish them. Customers will tend to generalize about their marketing capabilities and reliability, how good their editing or cover designs are, and, of course, the character of their lists. Knopf and Crown might both be imprints of Random House, but knowledgeable buyers will make and believe in real distinctions between them, as though they were separate companies. Within a publisher, an imprint is effectively an operating unit, working with shared central services. In most big publishers where we know the practices, the imprints are assigned notional profit and loss calculations that often affect the bonuses of the staff of those imprints. The head of the imprint, who could be an editor-in-chief or a publisher, runs his or her own operation, which covers most of the single-title decisions about what to publish and how to publish it. Manufacturing, sales, and fulfillment are handled by central services. Publicity and title marketing live in the imprint, and rights sales tend to be centralized with the big house, although we have known of exceptions where the imprint kept that function. Generally, small stuff is kept individualized within the imprint, and large stuff that depends on scale is handled by the owning house for all the imprints. How did the proliferation of imprints happen? And what challenges does the structure create both for the imprint managements and for the big houses that own them? It has long been obvious to publishers that sales and warehousing benefited from increased size and scale, but that editing and title marketing did not. It was natural for big publishers to want to add more volume throughput to support their scale operations, and it was just as natural for smaller publishers to see that their unit costs for everything were higher than the big guys' costs were. So the big houses could squeeze more margin out of every sale and make more sales. Acquisition and merger just followed logically. Once combined, though, some rationalization, making rules so that the new imprints played nicely with the house's practices, policies, and other imprints, became necessary. Would a big house allow two imprints to compete in an auction for the same book? Obviously, rules were needed around that, and different houses make them differently. Many, if not most, work out in advance which of their imprints will go after any particular title. But that's complicated too, because imprint heads have agent relationships, and many of them overlap. There are complications that arise on the rights and sales sides also. If you have a customer that wants books on knitting, or books for troubled teenagers, or books for dedicated sports fans, there is a good chance those books will exist in several different imprints in the house. Sometimes marketing opportunities require an investment, and different imprint heads could have different ideas about what makes sense. So the imprint structure was created for efficiency, but its existence creates efficiency challenges. Why have so many publishing companies been taken over by foreign ownership? There has been an outcry over the majority of U.S. book publishing companies having gradually fallen under the control of foreign companies, and the phenomenon is easy to track. In the 30 years covered by our data, the shift is from one company, under UK control, accounting for between 5 and 10% of sales, to a landscape where 58% of sales are under foreign control. It is not clear why this shift to foreign ownership of U.S. publishing has happened, but one possible reason is the change in the organization of the English language world, which took place in the early 1970s. Before that time, the English language world was divided by overt agreement between New York, where American publishers controlled the books in the United States and the Philippines, and London, where British publishers controlled the books throughout the rest of the English-language world, specifically Britain, Australia, India, South Africa, and the rest of the former Empire. The British publishers had sufficient power to enforce that division, effectively forcing American publishers and agents to sell their Commonwealth rights to a UK house for parceling out. Then the U.S. publishers were forced by the Justice Department to stop this collusion and restraint of trade. U.S. publishers signed a consent decree requiring them to open up the marketplace for future books, so they were no longer allowed to agree to the standard divisions that had always governed. In effect, this converted the English-language market from one that was about 2 equal pieces to one that was many pieces, with the United States being by far the single largest piece. That made U.S. publishing attractive to own for many publishers, including all the British ones. And that might explain the fact that UK and German publishers own most of the industry in the United States today. What makes the book business different from all other businesses? In a single word, granularity. There are just so many more books than there are movies or TV shows or albums of music, and that effect alone would create massive differences in audience identification and marketing strategy. In figurative terms, Hollywood has always produced hundreds of movies, while New York has produced thousands of books. But not only are books more diverse in number, they are also more diverse in topic and character, and they are created for many different reasons. As a result of this defining feature of book publishing, book retailing is different from all other retailing. But if the motivations behind the creation of those books are highly disparate, the motivations behind the purchase decisions are, if anything, even more so. Book retailing has to deal with an almost limitless selection of products. In fact, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos started with books because he saw that the vast selection that might appeal to any consumer constituted a severe challenge to stores with limited shelf and presentation space. He realized that putting search tools into the hands of the consumer would frequently present a shopping experience that was superior to in-store browsing. 2. From idea to book. What are agents, and what do they do? Agents, also sometimes called literary agents in the book business, represent authors in their business interactions with publishers. The biggest publishers get nearly all their books through agents, so agents are effectively both scouts for new material and gatekeepers acting as editorial filters before publishers even see a work. They, not publishers, are the ones to whom fledgling authors go when they want to break into the industry. And it is extremely difficult to get the attention of major publishers without going through an agent. Compounding the challenge of breaking in for an aspiring author, it can be difficult to get the attention of a reputable agent. Some authors are lucky and get discovered by agents the same way that talent scouts might find models or actors, inspired by blogs, articles, or news coverage of authors-to-be. Others seek out agents to represent their work. Either way, they are connected, and the two parties have decided to work together, often meaning that they have signed a contract saying the agent will represent the author in question. Their partnership begins with crafting what the agent will send the publisher. Agents and authors work together on a book proposal or manuscript, usually a proposal, and then send it out to publishers. Publishers expect agents to give them professionally developed and vetted proposals, and, ultimately, manuscripts. Active agents meet with publishers regularly, mostly with the acquisitions editors who actually spearhead the search for books for publishers, but also, as appropriate, with marketing and sales staff, as the agent's books move through the publishing process. They have extensive networks of editors and publishers and know just whom to contact when an exciting new project lands on their desk. As authors' representatives, agents make the deals with publishers and negotiate the terms of the contracts. The biggest agents have negotiated their own unique boilerplate contracts with the biggest publishing houses, meaning they have made specific amendments to the publisher's contracts that can be called up any time the agency and publisher in question work together, without having to rehash the terms. Book contracts cover a wide range of issues, and therefore agents' changes to them do as well. From who gets to
Sample complete. Ready to continue?